Okay, moving on. Right, you know, it's funny, isn't it? This has been sat with drain plug out for God knows how long, but tip it upside down and there's another gallon comes out from somewhere. It's all the same, isn't it? Mopping up. And anyway, until it's completely stripped and you can clean everything, you don't. There's oil lurking in every corner. So what we'll have a quick look at now is some of the oil circuit before I split it. So I've got the cover off over the output shaft, and we can see the oil feed that comes from just in here, that actually, when the cover's on, feeds our banjo bolt, which then goes out to feed the valve gear. There's also a chamber here sealed up by the gasket with a little jet that comes from under there through there, essentially, that feeds. That's where the clutch push rod goes. So it obviously feeds oil into the centre of the input shaft, and looks like it pressurises that, so there'll be holes along the shaft we'll see in the gearbox when we get that out, so where oil will come out of there. So let's have a look at what Honda thought was the way forward. So I've just slackened everything off so you're not watching me undo bolts. Yeah, it's a bit mucky in there. There's no big lumps or lumps of metal or whatever in there, so I'm quite happy with that. Just sort of, you know, real fine sediment that's in the bottom of there, so that's exactly as it was. Right, so if I can, it's sat on a block at the minute, if I can tilt it this way and add, there we go, that's a bit better. Get my pointer. Okay, we've got the oil strainer and the pickup. So in here we see the end of the shaft there that comes through here that drives the water pump, and there's also the shaft there which is behind the back of the clutch, so it's driven like this, as you can see that by the clutch, through the oil pump, actually all the way through the oil pump to drive the water pump as well, outside this side. So anyway, looking at the oil circuit, we have the strainer there, which on the face of it there's not much in that actually, little bits and pieces that give that a good clean out, so we'll just put that to one side. It exposes a bit more for us to see. There's the oil pump, the same as I was talking about before, the suction side. So in goes the oil into the gears inside the pump, and then essentially we have one outlet. So this is our outlet, pressurized outlet now, so we've got oil pressure in here. Pressure is ungoverned at this point. It's, what's the word, exponential, is it, with engine speed. Okay, so yeah, if you think about it, from tick over, sort of, well, I don't know, say 1,000 revs ticking over, it's got to create enough oil pressure to keep it safe. All the way up to, what's this thing go up to, 11,000 revs or whatever. So this is obviously mechanically driven at a set speed to engine speed. So if it produces enough oil pressure at 1,000 RPM, the oil pressure it's going to produce at 11,000 RPM, at high RPM, whatever it is that it revs at, say 10, whatever, then the pressure is going to be phenomenal. So we have to have a way of governing that, and that's where this little device here comes in. So what we've got is a preset ball and plunger on a spring. You can kind of just see the spring in there. What it is this sits in, and the sump holds that down like that when the sump's fitted. It sits in the oil pressure gallery. So as engine speed increases, as does oil pressure increases, okay, it's then, right, we reach a limit, a preset limit that Honda decided, whatever that limit was, that in this chamber now we're under pressure into here, just into here, and the only place it goes from there, feeling around the casting, is into, let's just see if we can get, let's see if I can show as much as I can. Up there are two holes in this bit. Okay, there are two holes. So oil pressure is now out the pump, down this metal pipe that's just kind of sat, and the sump holds it on, into this chamber in here. and that chamber is this oil filter. So it's everything's so lathered. Will it sit on there? Right, so that chamber there is this outer part, not the centre bit, which is the thread, is the outer bit. So it then pressurises into the filter, through the filter, and then comes back up the centre, which is, so essentially it's in this chamber here, coming through the filter and then back down into that centre hole. Okay, so we talked about 10,000 RPM. What's the oil pressure going to be like? It's going to be phenomenal in here. If it can produce, I don't know, what's it need to be safe? So 20 psi idle, something in the region of that. You know, we're not splitting hairs, it's something like that. So what potentially could it be at 11,000, 10,000 RPM? So what happens is this oil pressure relief valve in here. So this oil, it will just pull out, it'll just be on an O-ring. So basically that's sat in the same pressurised chamber as this is in this casting, and was what's going into the oil filter. All he does is the ball lifts off its seat and starts to allow, there's a hole at the side of it there and there, and all it does is bleed off pressure. So the spring and the ball collectively just maintain a steady oil pressure. As soon as the engine speed drops again and the oil pressure starts dropping, this ball will sit back on its seat, and it has no no cause for it to lift off its seat until the RPM increases again, and then it lifts up. So it maintains a set oil pressure by this oil pressure relief valve. So moving on with that, we're now in this chamber. Now this chamber, through there, you can see it's been bored. Hope you can see that through there. And we've got lots of drillings coming into that, okay, but it's essentially this bar in here. And as you can see, the crank is down there. So when we split the cases, we'll be able to see it. But what it is this is a pressurised chamber. And there's one of them going to that big end. There's the two, that main bearing, that main bearing, that main bearing, and then main bearing at the end. So this is a pressurised chamber here that is set, I mean, you look at the bore size of it, it's set predominantly to feed the crank, which is where most oil needs to be anyway. Is to feed the crankshaft. That's where all the work's done, and that's where most of the oil pressure needs to be. So it's quite simple. So out the pump pressurised into this line. They've used a steel pipe to get it from there to there, into the filter, maintained pressure and checked pressure by the oil pressure relief valve, through the filter, back through the centre, into this chamber here, and then there's drillings from that chamber from the other side that feed the shells, okay, which we'll see as we take it to bits. So where now, you may say, is how does the valve gear get its oil, which is back to what we said in the previous video. In this pump, we can't actually see it now because it's still bolted in. When I take the pump out, you'll see a little oil feed that hasn't come through this side to be filtered and then pressurised back up to the cams. It just got sucked up and pressurised up to the camshafts, and it has to be said, it could be better, let's put it that way. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the oil inside, and pretty much most engines. The bottom of the big end caps in there, see the chains, see the gearbox just through there, which we'll get that shortly when we get it more and more stripped. So it was just a bit of an overview, if you like, of how that actually works. It'll become clearer when I get it more stripped. So let's move on. Okay, just moving on from what we discussed earlier. See a little bit more now with the oil pump out of the way. Again, it was here, it had a feed pipe that fed into here. Same chamber is where oil pressure relief valve sits, and it feeds into here, and obviously if I move, you can see the pencil is in the same. Or I'll tell you what we'll do, we'll just, I don't know if you saw that, we'll put, there you go, you can see, so essentially he feeds into that one through into the filter, and the oil pressure relief valve keeps it checked at a set pressure, predetermined by Honda. With them oil pressure relief valves, I'll have a look at that in a bit more detail, but you can kind of take the circlip out, put a little washer behind it, it increases the preload on the, I mean, this has been done with the sidecar lads in the, and probably, it just increases the preload on it so it maintains a higher oil pressure at high RPM, you know, when it's really working its tits off, so to speak. So but anyway, that's so that's where we are. So we've got all the succession of bolts to undo now and get everything ready for lower, lifting the lower crankcase off. So I'm going to get it positioned a little bit better on its blocks, get all the bolts undone, and we'll have a look at it apart. So yeah, seeing the gearbox in here, seeing the gearbox in there. Ah, that's what I meant to, yeah, out the pump, if you remember, we said there was a separate side that feeds the cams. There it is, out the pump, it sits on there and goes into that little, which is this casting here. So all it does is, it's obviously been drilled in the manufacturing process, which is here. That's the feed to some of the, we'll find, I think, as we take it to bits a bit further, you'll see there's separate circuits that go to feed the bearings, and well, obviously to fit that feeds this bearing with the cover on. But yeah, the oil side for the camshaft is fed there, you know, so it really is a bit poor. It really needs to be off this circuit, the high pressure, high volume circuit, rather than fed off the back of the oil pump through this little, all I'm saying is, I mean, it works, yeah, it works, it does work, you can't say it doesn't, it does work, but I think it could be better. I think that's the best way of putting it. Anyway, we'll move on and we'll catch it up in a bit. Okay, case is split. Yeah, you can see the main bearings in the lower, this is the lower half, the cam chain slip on that side, and its locating guide, and also the rear cylinder's locating guide. Right, okay, normally when in a split horizontal crankcases, you'll get like both gearbox shafts, the crank and everything all kind of held, half of it in one half and half of it in the other half. Not the case with this one. We've got, Honda have chose to line bore the cases and put this gearbox shaft in, as you can see the bearing there. So that gear is way too big to get through that hole, so what you have to do, you only get as far as that gear through the hole, and then it has to be disassembled along the shaft to withdraw it from out the cases. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that first, so I can lay it out in order that it came out, and we'll look at what we've got when I get it out, because you just need another pair of hands. So yeah, okay, so we'll do that, and we'll pick it up in a minute.